What's good, YouTube? Welcome back into the MLS Digest Show. Great to have you guys all back here. And we're here for week 31 of MLS action when we just had last weekend's slate of only 6 games. So only 12 teams played due to the international break. Could have had a whole week off, but that's just how the MLS schedule operates. And in that meantime, we had Red Bulls taking on Kansas City. That was a 1-1 draw. Red Bulls extending their winless run. They've had a lot of draws lately. And then the Revs played St. Louis City at home. That was another 2-2 draw. And there was a lot of controversy with the refs and VAR. And Caleb Porter, the Revs coach, had a crazy kind of rant calling the ref a coward and all these other things. And because of that, he's going to be suspended for this upcoming weekend's game for the Revs on the sideline. We also had the Crew hosting the Sounders. The Crew had a bunch of their star players out from front to back due to the international break. We're still forced to play because it was a rescheduled game against the Sounders that was very early on in the season postponed due to very bad weather. And the Sounders end up winning 4-0 because the Crew had their first two choice goalkeepers out and they could only submit one goalkeeper for the game due to certain rules that I'm not really going to get into. But Wilfred Nancy, the Crew coach himself, had his own rant because of that, because the reason the scoreline was that in favor of the Sounders and against the Crew was because their one goalkeeper they had ended up getting a red card. So they had to sub in Zawadzki in goal, an outfield player, a midfielder, and that's why the Sounders were able to run it up, got some kind of easier goals than maybe they could have. And yeah, the Crew suffer one of only, a handful of losses they've had this whole season. And then LAFC returned to play Houston after the two played the week before, and Houston won on the road at LAFC. But that was a 0-0 draw. Houston couldn't get anything going with their possession against the really weakened LAFC side, who had a bunch of their own stars out due to the international break. And then DC United goes on the road, beats Chicago Fire 2-1. That's back-to-back road wins for them, and they're now sitting in that final playoff spot in the East. And then the Whitecaps hosted Dallas. That was a 0-0 draw. And the Whitecaps will be kicking themselves, though, because despite the fact they had way more players out, Dallas really didn't have anyone out for the break. Despite that, they really pushed it on Dallas and really came close with a couple goal line clearances, really saving Dallas. The backup goalkeeper for Dallas, with Martin Paes out for Indonesia, that keeper really went crazy and really earned them a point they probably didn't deserve. But we're here now for week 31. We have a loaded 14-game slate once again, and honestly, I'm just gonna put all my chips on the table. I think this slate is gonna be a top 3 slate for this entire season. We got the Hell is Real Derby edition number 2 of the season, Crew versus Cincy in Cincy. After Cincy beat the Crew early on in the season on the road. So the Crew looking to get revenge there, and the Crew also with the chip on their shoulder after that whole goalkeeper fiasco last week. And then we got El Trafico Part 3 this season. LAFC has already done the double, beating LA Galaxy twice, once at home and then once at the Rose Bowl game, looking to go for 3 for 3, which would be insane. And then we have a bunch of other insane games. I think there's a lot of potential for goals on the table. There's only 6 or 7 games left in the season, depending on which team is playing. And there's so many, spots left for playoff positioning, a lot of points up for grabs. So we have 4 best bets for the show, including another 2-unit after our 2-unit last week hit. We had a positive weekend last weekend on the shortened slate. And we're going to get into every game, lineups, what to look out for after these players are returning from the international break, and everything else to look out for these games. So let's get into the week 31 slate. So I know I said the slate has a lot of potential here, but this is the first game of it, and sometimes you just kind of have to move past the filler to get to the really good stuff, and this is one of those. Let's be honest here. Atlanta takes on Nashville, and Atlanta, it's clear they're rebuilding for next season for the most part, but they're really still, they still have a chance of making the playoffs. They've dropped out of the spots. They're only 1 point behind DC with a game in hand. The remaining schedule doesn't look that, outrageously hard, but at the same time, they're not a very consistent team. They're 5-3-5 at home. Meanwhile, Nashville is tied for third least points on the road in the entire MLS. They're dead last in the East in road points with 9. And they're currently on an 8-match losing streak. They've been shut out in 5 of those losses. Callahan and his ideas just really haven't worked so far. It doesn't seem like he's just doesn't have the players to kind of, get through with his ideas and the tactics. At least that's how it looks so far. There's a lot of just general talent in terms of progression through the midfield to get attackers like Mukhtar, make them relevant, because he's been a ghost this season as much as most of the team. And the defense just hasn't lived up to it either. They've just been swapping in and out. Zimmerman's been the only staple, but even with him in, they're just not reliable. And also, Atlanta fired their technical director, Boca Negra, and it just seems like a lot of disarray. If Atlanta made the playoffs, I'd honestly be surprised, just based on the direction they're headed, the way they're trying to rebuild the team. But they can easily get the 3 points here. I think they should, and they really haven't missed too many players. They had Luis Abram, Lobjanidze, and Schließ out for the international break, but they should all be coming back into the team normally. It's not like they played too many minutes. All the, final international games were Tuesday, and all these matches are on Saturday. That's just a good note to have going forward for the rest of these games, just so everyone knows. And yeah, so I just don't think fitness or playing too much or whatever is going to be an issue, because really not too many of these players played two like double 90s or anything like that while they were away. So regardless, Atlanta also has a problem with their DMs. Fortune and Muyumba are both dealing with their own kind of injury issues. And so that could be an issue in terms of maybe Nashville exploiting that and somehow getting on the score sheet, but they have not even averaged 1 goal per game this season, and we're this far into the season. So it's hard to rely on them to score anyways. It doesn't really matter who it is, especially going on the road. And so I think this should be with Moranchuk in, Lobjanidze's, Jean De Silva. They've been starting TR recently, TRA, and, I think Atlanta should probably come out victors here, but they have their problems of their own. But I am going to give the slight lean to them. I'll say 2-0. It really doesn't get much better than this one. It's hell is real. And Cincinnati versus the Crew, this cross-state rivalry. And Cincy went on the road this season, got their first ever win at the Crew in normal MLS play. Before that, the Crew had won 4 and 1 draw when the Crew hosted. So meanwhile, here in Cincy has won 2 in this matchup. 3 of them have been drawn, and the Crew have won 1 on the road at Cincy. So a bit more of a split kind of results there when Cincy hosts. And obviously neither have in one season. It has never happened where both have beaten each other, at their own home, or on the road. And I think Crew have what it takes to win here. But that's not where my money's going to be put. This is going to be my actually first best bet. It's going to be the 2 unit for the show, and it's going to be 2 legs. So this is the first leg, and we're just taking it, making it simple here. We're taking the over 2.5. It's mind-blowing to me that this is, a playable parlay kind of 2-leg price that it is. And it's just crazy because this is just one of the top 3 easy, if not the best rivalry in MLS. And it always delivers. 9 out of the last 10 of these matchups have hit this over, including the playoffs. And if you even go back further beyond that, I mean, it's just an insane hit rate, whether both teams score or not. Like, usually they do, and they should here as well. But regardless of that, it just hits regardless. We've seen some 3-0s and all that. So honestly, though, I was debating also adding a unit to the Crew money line or draw no bet, because Cincinnati, they have 0 home clean sheets in their last 8 games. They obviously were built on that identity, but they've just taken so many injuries, like we've talked about. Hagland and Miazga out for the whole season. Miles Robinson and Murphy now are both suspended on yellows, so that leaves them even thinner. And you're going to see something like Powell and Murphy back there, and then Awazim probably. And they signed him, but that really hasn't fixed things recently. And also Hadebe, who they signed recently from the Greek league, I believe. But he hasn't even featured for them yet, so it's hard for him to imagine logging many minutes as well, because he really hasn't played since the end of like May when that Greek season concluded. He went out for this past international break, and still, I just don't see him getting a full start here. But we'll see. It's still, even if he does, like, that's your first game, you're put into this, and you're basically on your second or third choice, back line. And the ones that are maybe first choice, like Hadebe, who you want to sign to help things, really hasn't had any chemistry with the team yet. So it's just not the right situation to plug him into if they did. And the Crew are going to get everyone back here. No one's really missing in terms of health. They had so many players, like we talked about, going for the international break, and that hurt them in their Sounders loss. But they have that kind of chip on their shoulder from that loss. And, I just think they also want revenge from Cincinnati going into their own, home field and beating them. So I think that's definitely on the cards. I think this has the potential for just going through over 3.5 and just being another classic derby between these two teams like we've always expected. It doesn't really matter when the goals come, like we saw in the last matchup, because they could come in bunches once that first one comes. And I just think Cincinnati as well, it's hard to imagine them holding a clean sheet. They've also had a lot of rest. They also, obviously, the Crew played during this past weekend slate, and Cincinnati got that extra week off. Acosta's been dealing with his own injury, even though he's featured in the past couple games. I think that's crucial for him. And, Cincinnati's attack as well, Oriano, Kubo, they signed Gio. I'm sure they're all ready to go here. Everyone's going to be up for this. Cucho, I think, even though he got called up to Colombia, didn't even play for the team. So, it's a good thing that he's being called up, but, it helps us hear that, there's no injury concern, no heavy minutes logged during that time gone. And so everyone should be good to go here. And it's, pretty straightforward. This is one of the best matchups in the league. And, banking on it to deliver is a pretty sure bet most of the time. And it looks that way again to me. And it really doesn't get much better than this one as well. Another top 2 derby in MLS, El Trafico. LA Galaxy versus LAFC. LA Galaxy on first in the West, LAFC in second. I think they have 2 games in hand. So this one means a lot more to the Galaxy to hold on to that spot, or at least draw. And they're also going to want revenge because they've lost the past 2 matchups, one at LAFC and one at the Rose Bowl. Both of them were 2-1 for LAFC. And in terms of our best bet here, this is the second leg of the 2 unit. The first one being Crew Cincy over 2.5. And we're going the same route here. We're taking the over 2.5 in this one to combine it. And we're getting good odds, really good value, plus 120. It's just crazy to me again. I don't know, because these 2 matchups always deliver. And it's hard not to expect the same here. This total has hit in 17 out of 20 regular season MLS matchups all time. And it's also both the score and the over 2.5 have hit in all of the last 9 matchups. And Galaxy as well, they're unbeaten at their true home. Their only home loss was their designated home game at the Rose Bowl that they lost to LAFC's. But here in Carson, they have 10 wins and 3 draws, 0 losses. Meanwhile, LAFC has been much more balanced on the road than previous seasons that we've come to know of them. 5-3-4. And yeah, Galaxy, they're going to be without Paintsill. Joveljic played the last game and featured a little bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if he starts here, because on top of that, he's been really working his way back from an injury and has been training longer. They didn't play last week. They're going to have the extra rest advantage on LAFC, who obviously played last weekend, had to travel to Houston. They played a grueling 0-0 draw, even though a lot of their main attackers were out in terms of Boanga, Bogusz, Oliveira on the international break. they're all going to be back here, but the rest of them are kind of a little bit less match fit or more under their legs. And I just think Galaxy as well. I think they've only been shut out one time at home this entire season, and that was a 0-0 draw. So if I might even be wrong, maybe they haven't been, but they're just a sure lock to score at home. LAFC obviously has been sound defensively, but Murillo's been out for a while now, and they're just going to be the less rested team. And LAFC on the same side, they're getting Bawanga back from Gabon duty, who played both games, but he would literally play like 7 games a week if he had to, because that's just his work rate. He literally never misses a game, whether it be Open Cup against a third tier side or whatever. Like, it really doesn't matter. If anything, Giroud will start up top anyways after playing last game. And this is just another kind of surefire bet that you have to take at the odds when you're combining these two. Like, 3.5 might be a push here, but going that high up. But Galaxy are going to want to bring the tempo here. Puig actually was suspended for the last game that they played against St. Louis, so he's going to be extra rested here. And now Royce sliding in maybe in that starting 11 next to him maybe takes a little bit more pressure off him and attention, because he has obviously his own ridiculous qualities. And Puig has kind of been a little bit quieter than usual in the last 2 matchups between these two teams this season. So maybe that'll take some attention off him. And then obviously they also have Fagundes to kind of help with that chance creation. But Peck as well has been super, super dangerous. And Julian Ade, their right back, has been out for some time now. I don't think he makes it back for this one as well. So that's another loss for them defensively. If I had to pick a side here, just like the Crew Cincy derby, I think the road team wins here. LAFC just seems to have Galaxy's number. The play style just seems to bother Galaxy as well. And it really actually does matter who gets this first goal here, because LAFC just knows how to sit in if they have to and counter you to death, especially if they have that lead. And I think if Galaxy scores the first goal here, then it's going to get really, really rowdy, because they're not really so good at, sitting in or, if they have to against a team like this. So this just leads to fireworks. And, I think LAFC can do the outrageous 3-for-3 against Galaxy this season. But regardless, this one and the other derby are just going to be 2 beautiful, matches to watch for the neutral fan. DC coming off back-to-back road wins. Now they're in that final playoff spot. They've picked up those wins at a very crucial time, and they continue to, try to control their own destiny. Meanwhile, NYCFC sitting in 5th in the East on 39 points. They're trying to get in that 4th and final home playoff spot with a handful or 6 games to go. And this one's really hard to call because DC missing Click in midfield, kind of a box-to-box player, and I think that's a big loss. Meanwhile, they're getting the likes of now back, their kind of defensive midfielder they signed, who got a red card in his debut, but and hasn't featured since then. He went on international duty, but he should be back for this one, no problem. Also, Herrera and Peltola coming back into the squad after they missed last weekend. DC was one of the teams that played on that short slate, so they had to go to Chicago. So a little bit less rest for them, but then NYCFC, on the other hand, only 13 goals in 14 road matches. That's 5th worst in the entire league. That's contributed to why they're not in that, in those home playoff spots as of right now. And they lost their last match after almost getting a point against the Crew. They gave up 2 goals in stoppage time. So that, even when they're scoring, even a 4-2 result, their defense hasn't been there. And now they have Matt Friese out due to a leg injury. And, I wouldn't expect him to be coming back anytime soon, especially for this game. But we'll see how how he recovers. And he's one of the top keepers in the league. So I think this one leads to goals just based on who's out. And DC's style of play just leads to goals. They haven't been that great at home either. They're giving up almost 2 goals at home, 2 goals a game at home. So it's hard to call a result because neither of the teams have been consistent. New York City on the road and just DC in general, but they are in the hotter form. And Benteke is now leading the Golden Boot race. We cashed on him last weekend at really good odds. Honestly, it's really probably a great bet to just blindly take every week. But anyways, I think this one probably reeks of a draw here. I'm going to go for a 2-2 result. Inter Miami just flying through the table here. They're really putting more than one hand even on the supporter shield. It's basically all but theirs. 59 points. They have 35 goals scored in 14 home games. And they're shooting as well, not just for the supporter shield, but for the points record for supporter shield. 73 was the record set by the Revs handful almost of years back, a couple of years back. And if they were to win out, they could potentially end on 80 points with 7 games left. So 21 points still up for grabs. And they can only lose about 6 points if they want their own record, 7 if they want to tie it. And I think that's very much in the realm of possibility here. As you can see, their schedule: Union, Atlanta, NYC, Charlotte, Crew maybe potentially the only game they drop a point or so in, Toronto, New England. Half of these games at home. Really only maybe 2 games you could think of and say maybe they'll outright lose it or drop points. And, even if they do, they still at least tie the record. So it's a lot of positivity surrounding the team right now. Everyone's pretty much good to go. Diego Gomez actually scored a banger for Paraguay to beat Brazil in World Cup qualifiers. So he's in really good form right now. Suarez played his final match for the Uruguayan national team, and he's back and ready to go based on, just social media and other reports. And Messi now actually been practicing on the side in the meantime. He missed practice the other day, but from the reports, it was unrelated to injury. He was kind of feeling something with I think a sore throat or something like that. So he could be coming off the bench in this match, and that is also just an addition to this attack. Even if he's on for 20 minutes, that just changes everything completely. And I still have no issues trusting this team anyways to score, and that's what leads me into the second best bet, which is going to be another 2-legger. And we start here with the first leg being Miami team total over 1.5. And it's basically around the same odds as their money line, but I'd rather just trust the 2 here. They've won all their 5 past home games in all comps. They've scored at least 2 in all of them, and they've actually given up a goal in all of them. So likely they need 2 to win here. And while I do think they beat the Union anyways, I'd rather just trust the goals instead of a result, because they have been conceding, right? And the Union as well have been a pretty good road team, and they're top 3 in goals scored on the road this season in all of MLS, and around that top 5 range in expected goals on the road. So it's not like they're scoring flukily. They have a pretty decent attack, but the thing is that on the other flip side, their defense has lost a lot of players like Martinez, now Damian Lowe, going away to other teams. So they're just weaker in defense, and this could be a shootout, but I'm just going to trust the home side, the better side, to deliver the goals in this one. They're continuing their supporter shield push. It seems like nothing's really going to get in their way, and I don't think the Union have what it takes to make them drop points. But usually they need a couple goals because there's always that threat of their weaker defense. And so yeah, we're just going to trust the 2 goals here. The Rapids hosting the Timbers in this one. 4th and 8th in the West, only separated by 4 points. So by no means are the Rapids securing that home playoff spot just yet. They still have a lot of work to do. The Timbers, as good as they've been at home, and getting points there, they haven't been terrible on the road, but still, as good as they've been, sitting only 8th in the West. And these two have matched up twice already this season. Both were at the Timbers. One was in League's Cup, and the Timbers dominated them in both games, 4-1 in MLS play, 4-0 in the Leagues Cup group stage. But now Colorado gets a chance for revenge, and they're basically tied, very fractional numbers, but difference, but they're basically tied for first. If you want to go by strictly, they're third in expected goals total for this whole season with LA Galaxy and LAFC. So they're very much one of the best attacks in MLS. Timbers as well, despite the fact they're going on the road here, they still have very respectable numbers on the road. Even on the road as well, they tend to give up more goals, obviously. So that helps us here as I get into leg 2 of this second best bet. Rapids Timbers over 2.5 with that Miami team total over 1.5. So that gets us to plus 106. So very good odds. I'm taking a lot of the spots I like here, just juicing them down a little bit. And we're getting good odds. I just see goals across this whole slate. But getting back into this specific match, the Rapids have actually won 8 out of their last 11 at home. Very strong home form themselves. The other 3 were draws. And so, yeah, they don't lose much at home. They like to score a lot. But defensively, they've been a little bit shakier recently, even at home. They've had a lot of both the scoring overs. And Sam Vines, their left back, got injured recently. And they've been running out Travis for the one game in the meantime. That didn't really help them. The younger kid, it was a 3-2 result they had to get at Dallas. So they've been leaky, but they've also been scoring. And so that's been really a theme with both of these teams. And the Timbers actually now getting back Jonathan Rodriguez and Felipe Moore for this one after they both missed that Cascadia derby against the Sounders 2 weeks ago. So they're going to be very fresh, and this should be another one that just delivers. This is one of the highest totals if not the highest price or just total on the board for the entire slate. So we're just juicing it down by 1, and I just see no issues with this hitting. It should be good weather. Neither of these teams defensively are very solid. Obviously, the Rapids lost Bombito, and now they just signed Cannon the other day, but it's really remains to be seen if he's ready to go or not. But regardless, it's going to take some time to get used to, and I just don't expect either of these teams to be held off the board. It's really just about who wins. I would lean the Rapids just because of the Timbers' road struggles, but I should see no problem with either of these teams contributing and getting this total over the line. Orlando hosting the Revs, sitting in 7th. Meanwhile, the Revs in 12th. And the Revs do have a pretty favorable schedule the rest of the way. They've very much gotten healthy. They've gotten a couple signings, including Langoni who scored in the last game, has already scored 2 goals, picked up, I think, at least 1, maybe 2 assists in 2 sub appearances, and now finally his first start. That's a good sign for the Revs, but they are missing Caleb Porter here, their coach, after that St. Louis City 2-2 result where he got very antsy about the reffing situation. So that's a big loss for them, your manager on the sidelines. But regardless here, the Revs only 12 points on the road. They have 4 wins and 8 losses, 0 draws. So they just don't draw on the road. It's one way or the other. And Orlando City, in the meantime, 13 goals in their last 4 home matches. Last time out, they beat Nashville 3-0, one of the worst teams in the league, pretty comfortably. And yeah, just generally getting much better results at home after a shakier start to the season. Both these teams with very shaky starts to the season, but Orlando definitely the much, more solid side. I do lean them in this game, but the Revs, once again, I don't mind their attack. I've been, taking them recently. In recent weeks, they are 2-unit on their last game cashed with the St. Louis, but here, hard to expect them to get a result. Orlando just far too strong at home. They've been really clicking with all the lineup tinkering. I think Pereira's gotten it right. And obviously New England on the shorter rest, they have to travel all the way down to Orlando. I think Orlando gets this one once again. And regardless, I think New England has more games left to pick up and can definitely still make a playoff push. But in this one, I say Orlando wins 2-1. Montreal hosts Charlotte. Montreal sitting in 13th in the East. And this is one of those lower East teams that, despite the fact they're very much mathematically in it for the playoffs, I'm just very much not high on them to make this late push and close out the season strongly. And here I'm taking Charlotte draw no bet, minus 120 as the third best bet. Charlotte, obviously we know about them at home, very strong record. They love to grind out these 1-2-0 wins. And defensively, regardless of if they're home or away, they're usually very solid, obviously. On the road, they've given up just 17 goals, but only scored 16 themselves. So that's been sort of their problem, is their scoring has hindered them from, once again, one of these teams that are still very technically sound and defensively sound, but the scoring has been why they're not sitting in those top 4 playoff spots in the East. And so we're getting the push protection here, and that's a big deal for a Montreal team that has lost their last 2 home games, and coming out of Leagues Cup, the 2 games they have played in MLS, they've conceded 9 in those 2 games, including that one home game they had 5-0 loss to the Revs. And they have some of the worst, obviously, expected goals allowed numbers in the league. Their home form has been kind of their saving grace, but obviously, like we just talked about, it hasn't been anywhere near that lately. They got rid of so many key players, in my opinion, over the window. Lassiter, Toy, Chonier, all these key kind of midfielders and forwards. And they kind of sort of replaced the wingbacks, but really the midfield now just kind of looks a little young. And I'm not very much sold on their attacking options to be too much of a threat to Charlotte here. But I really like the price we're getting on the push protection. I think Charlotte has had, both these teams have had the extra week off. Obviously, neither of them played during the last week's small slate during the window, international window. And Charlotte coming off a disappointing 1-0 loss at home to Atlanta. And I think they're going to, I just like them in this spot. I think Montreal is one of those teams that can give Charlotte a little bit of a confidence boost in terms of their attack. This is not a side that is hard to really score against or break down. And being at home, I don't think Montreal is going to be one of those teams to obviously make it difficult and sit back. So this could get a little bit open. And I obviously trust Charlotte's defense. Agamang is dealing with a toe injury. They're kind of their main striker, but I wish that was honestly, I wish he was healthy, because I definitely prefer him over Świderski, who's really not a true 9. But I still think they have enough what it takes with BL now getting acclimated with a couple games. He's had some time to train with the team more, obviously, without more games in the past 2 weeks. And, the players who went on break like Abada and Reem, I don't see them missing out because of that. Like I said, everyone played Tuesday as their final game, or a couple of them, depending on what team they were on or country, played Monday maybe. So fitness shouldn't be an issue, and I think Charlotte definitely has what it takes to get a confidence boosting road win. They've come few and far between, but they also haven't, their road record hasn't been terrible. So I'm going to trust them here. I think at worst this pushes, and I think we're getting a good price for just a really sound team that is just the better team here. So Toronto hosting Austin in this one. Toronto still clinging on to that 8th spot. I personally don't think they're going to be one of those playoff teams when it's all said and done. I think there's a couple teams that can definitely catch up to them. But this is one where I do think they have the potential to still cling on to that spot and get the 3 points. Austin obviously doesn't really travel well, and both these teams coming off losses from their past game that each played 2 weeks ago. And both these teams are going to be pretty fully healthy. Austin really the only one missing a player with Heinz Ike, who got subbed off in the last match late due to injury. So Toronto's going to have Bernadeschi and Insigne. This is just one of those on this slate where I'm very excited for this slate, but this is one that I really, it's just kind of a throwaway to me, and neither of these teams really, inspire me and inspire you to watch them or want to watch them. Austin had their great Leagues Cup, but since then still shaky once again. After that, haven't built on it, and especially on the road, I don't see them. They got to win at Nashville, but I think Toronto has also gotten some poor home results recently as well. And if I have to lean aside, I'm going to take Toronto to win 2-1. The Fire hosting Red Bulls, and this is another one where I think it's just going to be very low eventful game. And the Fire have now 5 losses and a draw in their last 6 games. Red Bulls, on the other end, another draw in their last game against Kansas City. Both these teams played last week, so neither has the kind of rest advantage. Chicago does get to stay home, though. Red Bulls have to obviously travel. And Red Bulls have 13 draws on the season. Only St. Louis can say they have as many. So that's really been, they have had very strong home form, the Red Bulls. They finally picked up a loss the other week to the Union, but it's really been partially their road form and then just their lack of scoring on top of that. They had Morgan and Coronel Elliott out last week. They should be coming back here, but it's just been their lack of scoring, especially with how long Forsberg's been out. That has somehow they are still fourth in the East, but if they slip out, it's gonna be because of that, because they simply are not creative enough as high as we were on them entering the season. They haven't reached that next level. So Fire on the other end, they really don't have a true home advantage. They had to play at SeatGeek last week out, which I completely missed as another angle in that game against DC. And I think they should be back at Soldier Field here. The Bears are going to be playing on the road this weekend, so there shouldn't be problems with that. But yeah, the Fire are just very unreliable. Red Bulls have a solid defense regardless, so I think they're going to make this low eventful anyways, minimize their risks. And I think Red Bulls probably have the better chance at stealing the 3 points, just based on these kind of styles clashing. But I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, and neither of these teams help their cases to, attain their late season goals. Dynamo hosting RSL. These teams have met 2 times. Once was in the Leagues Cup, where the Dynamo knocked RSL out with a very convincing 3-0 victory. Meanwhile, when they played in league play before that, RSL won 3-2 in a really good match. But now these teams are looking a little different, specifically RSL, who's still sitting third in the West, but their attack has kind of lost an edge to it with Gomez leaving in the transfer window. They got a crazy high fee for him. They had to sell him at that price, and now they brought in Goncalves and Marchuk, Lachlan, these kind of wingers, and then a number 10, but they really haven't picked up their true potential because Chicho's also been out in the meantime. After serving that suspension, he picked up a hamstring injury, and he's probably out for this one. It's probably going to be out for another week or so at least. So it's not a reliable attack anymore like it was for most of this season, but the transfer window really changed things for them, and they're going to really have to find their form again and get healthy to really stay as that true contender. I still think they hold on to one of these top 4 spots, but Houston on the other end has just been disappointing recently, especially at home. We took them last week against a very battered and bruised LAFC side, and LAFC just held on for that 0-0, which was probably the better angle in hindsight. Just take the under, but yeah, that's just been a theme in Houston matches. The under 2.5 has hit in 9 out of their 13 home matches, and yeah, RSL has been okay defensively season long. Recently, it's been a bit of an issue, but Houston just lacks that kind of chance creation. They lost to Nali, their kind of younger winger. Aliyu has been okay in that spot, but nothing too dangerous. And the good thing for them is that Carrasquilla has been featuring in the past couple matches off the bench, so maybe he starts here, and that's a good sign for them because you could tell right away in that LAFC match that he was really one of their only sparks, because this team, especially at home, just kind of gets a little much too complacent with the ball because they have one of the highest possession rates, but they just kind of die out when it comes to their tempo and just especially getting Ponce some service. So this one's another one that's hard to call. I do have the watchability rating high because I think RSL can pick it up a gear here and they have had the extra rest, so they can potentially steal the points. But Houston, we know that they like to lock it down once they get the lead. So it's interesting to see how this plays out, who gets the first goal, and how it plays out from there. But this one's one that's hard to call. I think Houston drops points again. Does RSL get the 3 points? I'm not sure that they have the cohesion right now with the new players in their squad to steal it. But I'm gonna go for a 2-2 draw. St. Louis City hosting Minnesota, and this is a big one for the Western playoff race because Minnesota's sitting in that final playoff spot right now, which St. Louis is chasing, but the games are just running out for them. And it's just come a little too late for them. Maybe they would really have to basically win out. They were held to a 2-2 draw at the Revs last weekend, so they were still winless on the road this far into the season. That was a huge opportunity for them. They would be sitting on 30 points now if they won that, and that would be maybe a little bit more manageable, especially if they also win this one here. But they still have to win this one to give themselves any sort of chance. And since the Germans have joined, or at least one of them, the first one, Tykert, St. Louis games, those 8 games have seen both the score in every single one of those games and both the score in the overhit in 6 out of those 8 games. And so that's why we're trusting that to continue in a sense by taking the over 3 in this game at -115. A little bit of juice, but really nothing obviously crazy, just basically a normal line. We're getting that push protection with the 3, and St. Louis in that same span since the Germans came, they are 3-1 at home, and they've been scoring for fun. Honestly, they've just been much better attacking wise, but that defense, obviously, like we've talked about, is still just as bad. And Minnesota as well, they have a top 5 worst road expected goals allowed. Both these teams have 2 of the bottom 8 expected goals allowed numbers in the entire league, just in general. And so this should just cater to goals. This match should be very highly intense. St. Louis City obviously having to push for that spot, and Minnesota still trying to cling on. They've slipped up after a very hot start to the season. And both these teams should be pretty healthy. Minnesota had a lot of players go out for the international window. St. Louis City had nobody, and they do have the less rest, but they are going to be at home here, so that's a boost. But Minnesota's players that went on the break should be coming back. Most of them were for Canada, and that was played here in the U.S. So Oluseyi's been healthy. He has been featuring in the past couple games. Maybe he starts, or Yeboah's been hot as well since coming over. And also Pereira, their kind of number 10-ish player, has been waiting on his visa, and the schedule was supposed to be for him to be available for this game. So we'll see if he has figured that out by now. I haven't seen any updated reports on if he's available, but he has been training. So as long as he gets it, and is obviously legally able to play, then he should be going here, and that adds another factor to this. I think St. Louis has what it takes to win here from a side perspective, but it's just so hard to see this not being an intense, highly eventful game. And so we're taking that push protection with a 3, and I think St. Louis probably gets this one over the line for us. Gets the multiple goals for us, and contributes more. But Minnesota definitely has attacking talent, and their defense as well, just despite the fact that they sometimes even play 5-back, has not been reliable. And so I think St. Louis gets this one 3-1 for us, but 3 should be a pretty attainable number, and we'll be hoping for that 4th and final one that St. Louis probably, maybe, we could see 2-2, but anyways, there has been no lack of attacking chances and finishing for St. Louis since they got their Germans. So the Whitecaps sitting in 6th in the West. They're only 2 points out of that 4th spot, and they really slipped up. Obviously, weren't, I guess, fully expected to win that game against Dallas with how many players they had out, about like 3-4 midfielders. Brian White with the concussion, Ryan Gauld on international. Stuart Armstrong did feature, so that's a good sign for them. Maybe he gets the start here, but before that, he was kind of saying he wasn't fully match fit, so maybe it might take another kind of 30 or 45 minutes in this one for him to be fully ready for the rest of this season. But they're sitting in an okay spot. I just don't think they're going to fall out of the playoffs completely, obviously. I think they're just too strong, and they still have a chance at that home slot. And this is just one you obviously have to get 3 points out of. The worst team in the league, who's also missing their top striker in Abobasi, and their defensive situation is obviously just doesn't need to be said. So whether White plays here is still questionable, I think, but Gauld and Armstrong and Pico, should be good enough to get them over the line. I still have just not been convinced recently because of this turnover with the squad and just kind of this back and forth nature of the schedule. So I'm not going to trust them, on a bet. I think if I do make any additions on this entire slate, it'll maybe be like one play max on the Twitter. I think I've kind of dipped my toes in everything I've wanted to in terms of like a goals perspective. But yeah, to take this one straight, it's obviously just the price is just way too high. But they obviously should be winning this one. And I'm going to say they do it. Maybe not very comfortably or excitingly, but I say they get this one done 2-0. The Sounders got a big win, obviously going on the road to the Crew, winning 4-0. Rusnak with a hat trick against Zawadzki, though, the midfield player who had to go into goal. So a very much skewed result there. I really didn't like, the way that match was looking in terms of their attacking production before that red card happened. It was still 0-0. So still, yeah, once again, this is a team I've been kind of fading at certain points of the season because I just think they are sort of a balanced team, but not a team you really love. And we faded them in that Cascadia Cup game against Portland. But they are back home here. They have just looked much worse recently, like we've talked about, because of those results against LAFC. They've played them 3 times in the past, month and a half or so, and that's really been the main source of their, the outlook on them recently, how they looked. So, but besides, if you take out the LAFC games, they've won 7 out of their last 8 home matches in all comps, and the problem with them is João Paulo is out again here. Kind of their midfield kind of maestro, or just keeps things in order. Vargas should be slotting in there. Stefan Fry is going to be back from his concussion, so that's a good sign for them. And for Kansas City, it's, more of the same. There's just not enough games to make up for them. They are, like I talked about with St. Louis, I think it's not probable, but it's still possible for them just based on their attacking talent. For KC, once again, they're in the Open Cup final. They're really not focused on this, even though that's still a couple weeks away, that final. But they did play last week. They got a point on the road against the Red Bulls, and Sounders are going to be at home here, like we talked about, strong home form, and Kansas City having to travel all the way back west just doesn't bode well for them. I think Seattle takes this one, but it probably won't be easy because, they, to me, are just not a very overwhelming attacking side. And Kansas City can definitely hold them off for a little bit, but probably not the whole match. And I'm going to say Sounders get this one done 2-0 as well. Thanks for tuning in once again, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this slate. Like I said, I think this is going to be up there with one of those top slates of the season in terms of entertainment value. I think those 2 derbies alone are going to carry this, if anything. But the rest of the game still, there's a lot of crucial playoff positioning matchups that should be high intensity. A couple teams on more rest and players coming back from their international teams. So we got 4 best bets once again with the 1-2 unit involving both those main derbies. And I think from a neutral perspective, regardless of what the outcome is, it's going to be entertaining as we wind down in the season. So once again, make sure to follow the Twitter at MLS Digest for more updates, maybe potentially more bets for this slate, and like and subscribe to the video if you've been enjoying the content. I'll see you guys next week for this upcoming midweek slate, actually on Wednesday, so it's going to be a short turnaround. I'll see you there for week 32.